An inhumane shipment of bodies. Gaza's health ministry is refusing to receive 88 unidentified bodies sent by Israel. Authorities want to know who they are and how they died. So is this another violation under international law? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I am Hashem Ahelbarra. Since October the 7th, Israeli forces have returned hundreds of bodies to Gaza, many decomposed and unidentifiable. But on Wednesday, Palestinian authorities refused to accept a container with at least 88 corpses until Israel provides full data with the victims' names, time of death and the location they were taken from. But why has Israel been allowed to do this in a degrading manner? And what more are Israeli forces planning to do in Gaza as they turn their attention to Lebanon? We'll get to our guests shortly, but first, this report from Kulthum Sharif.
Tamir Yassin, a displaced Palestinian, is desperate to find her missing son. Her search has brought her to this busy street in Gaza's southern city of Khan Yunis. She's anxious to know if her missing son is among the 88 dead bodies in this truck.
I got a call telling me there are dead bodies coming from Israel. I came running to see if my son is fine or dead. I want to know if he is among the dead bodies.
The bodies were brought into Gaza through an Israeli-controlled crossing on Wednesday. But Palestinian health officials at Nasser Hospital have refused to receive and bury them. They say Israel has not provided any details of the victims, and neither has it given information about where or how they were killed.
Look, there are dead bodies being thrown, left on the streets, and their families cannot identify their bodies. Here is the truck. The bodies are inside. We can't see them. The Arab countries don't care. If it were their kids, would they accept this?
The Palestinian Health Ministry has refused what it calls the inhumane shipment of bodies. It's called on human rights and international institutions to establish clear procedures to receive bodies from Israel. In a statement, it's also emphasized the need to receive the bodies according to humanitarian and international standards in a manner that preserve the rights and dignity of the owners of these bodies. This isn't the first time Israel has done this, forcing Palestinian authorities to bury bodies without first identifying them.
The major issue is that the occupation has concealed the data and information about these victims, holding the necessary details about their names, where they were recovered from, and which area they were targeted in. This is troubling given that there are a large number of missing persons amongst our people.
Under international law, bodies of those who've died in conflict must be handed over with dignity and buried in line with their religious rites. Their graves should be respected and preserved. But despite repeated warnings, Israel continues to return unidentified and decomposing bodies.
This is tragic. It is devastating to lose a son and then not be able to find his body. I'm exhausted and emotionally traumatized when seeing everyone else retrieving and burying their relatives, but I cannot find out where my son or father is. This situation is wearing me out.
More than 10,000 Palestinians are reportedly missing in Israel's nearly year-long war on Gaza. Their families are desperate to find out what happened to them. Kulthum Sharif, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guest in Copenhagen, Mohammed Shehada, Chief of Programs and Communications for Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor. In London, Ahmed Al-Nawaq, co-founder of We Are Not Numbers, a campaign to amplify the voices of Palestinians in Gaza, and Dr. Mustafa Barghouthi, Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. A warm welcome to the program. Mohammed, so there was this truck, which arrived in Khan Yunis, then the health authorities there said, no, we're not going to take this truck. We need to get more details about the bodies, who they are, where and how they died, and where were they kidnapped from. How do you see this whole story evolving in Gaza?
Well, I think this story perfectly epitomizes Israel's genocide in Gaza. Basically, you have people whom Israel killed, slaughtered, most likely civilians, that Israel afterwards kidnapped their bodies and took it back to Israeli mainland. And after a while, they dump it into a truck and leave it in Gaza in a container and expect the bodies to just be dumped in a mass grave without any consideration to the families or to the victims themselves. I think this is an extreme level of dehumanization, which is an integral part of Israel's genocidal campaign. To justify the genocide, your victims need to have no names, no details, and no human face. That's why you see victims return to Gaza in plastic bags, blue plastic bags, with mere numbers on top, without any details that could help to identify the bodies, where they killed, how they were killed, where they were taken from, when, and why. So it's perfectly part of this genocidal campaign.
Ahmed, in your platform, We Are Not Numbers, where you try to amplify the voices and the stories from Gaza. Is this something which has visibility in the international media? Do you see it attracting wider attention globally?
Unfortunately, we haven't seen that the international media takes this story and reports it exactly as what they have done during the past 70 years of this genocidal war against the Palestinian people. Since the Nakba, the Israelis have been dehumanizing the Palestinians, killing the Palestinians en masse, ethnically cleanse the Palestinians, and considering us merely as numbers. And unfortunately, we haven't seen the Western media or the international media take these matters seriously. And that's why we Palestinians, we took it upon ourselves to report the news from Gaza, to write the stories of those people who are considered as numbers or less than numbers in the eyes of the international media and the Israelis. And this is why we write our stories, because we are fed up with how the international media is reporting our stories, reporting what's happening in Gaza and on the ground. And this is what we do, and this is what we will continue to do.
Mustafa, we're dealing with a container full of decomposed bodies, and no one wants to take responsibility. It's parking there for hours outside of the hospital. The authorities there are saying, we're not going to handle this until we get more details from the Israelis. This is not the first batch of trucks that have been shipped to Gaza. How would you explain the way the Israeli government has been dealing with the case of dead bodies turned back to Gaza?
Well, thank you for hosting me, but I want you to imagine, and I want all the audience to imagine, that these 800 bodies, without names, decomposing in a truck, were bodies of Jewish people, or bodies of Israeli people, or as a matter of fact, bodies of American people. What would have been the reaction of the world? What would have been the reaction of the world media outlets, who are absolutely silent about this terrible crime again? What we face here is not only a violation of every international law, not only a violation of every human right, but it's a violation of our dignity as people. To do this to the people and put them in this indignified manner is not only unacceptable, it's a war crime, and it's exactly part of the genocide. But let me also ask the question, how were these 800 people killed? We have very strong reports and that tell us that the Israeli army field executed many of the Palestinian prisoners. And most probably, most of these people were field executed or tortured to death in the Israeli concentration camp in Sditi Man. We also have reports that there are 2,000 bodies that were buried around Sditi Man, of people who were kidnapped, killed, and whose identity is not known. We also know that the Israeli army kidnapped the bodies of Palestinians from graves. And now they're returning them. I'm sure they did the examination for each of these bodies, but they are not ready to give the information or provide anything that would keep the dignity of these people, at least, after they were tortured to death or killed in this inhuman manner.
Mohammed, we're getting all sorts of reports, conflicting numbers. The authorities in Gaza are talking about 10,000 missing in Gaza alone since the start of the war on Gaza. Has the international community betrayed those desperate to get any sense of information about their loved ones missing for many months?
Absolutely. And it's not something that they try to hide. So in recent months, I've been meeting with European officials and diplomats. And usually, as long as the camera is off, as long as it's behind closed doors, they admit they have let Gaza down on an epic scale, and that they are very cautious in the wording that they use in statements in a way that gives Israel leeway to continue the war. So they would be very, very determined to use words like Gazans are being starved or Gazans are being killed, and not to say Israel is killing Gazans and starving them, because that entails taking action towards it. They are very honest about this complicity on an unprecedented scale when it comes to Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. At the same time, they face themselves many complications in terms of trying to get Israel to improve the situation in Gaza itself. You have the most extreme, most right-wing, far-right government in Israel's history that looks at Gaza and says very explicitly, we're turning this place into dust. And you have an international community that at most is willing to criticize Netanyahu's persona, but not to exercise any actual pressure on Israel, not to take any measurable steps against the Israeli government. That, in a way, allows it to continue indefinitely.
Ahmed, the Civil Emergency Service, which is tasked with finding the people missing under the rubble on the roads or in ruined buildings in Gaza, these are people that you've been trying to reach out to in your platform, desperate to get any sense of update on the fate of their loved ones. What are people in Gaza telling you?
Well, I am from Gaza, and some of my relatives, some of my cousins have been missing since the beginning of this war in Gaza. We still don't know where they are now, whether they were killed or kidnapped or injured in the war. We still don't know any information about what happened to them. I'm hearing a lot of stories from our writers in Gaza and our writers who are scattered all around the world, who have families in Gaza. Many of them lost loved ones. Many of them don't know where the bodies of their lost ones are. I am even in contact with so many people from Gaza who live in the UK who have lost contact with their entire family since the beginning of the war. What's happening in Gaza is horrific. It's catastrophic, and no one could imagine the scale of horror that the people in Gaza are experiencing, are feeling, unless you go and live with the people in Gaza. We are not numbers. We're trying to document these stories. We're trying to encourage people from the ground, from Gaza, to write these stories in order to immortalize them. Because unfortunately, without us Palestinians having to write the stories to the world, these stories will be forgotten. These stories will not get any attention whatsoever.
I want to turn our attention to the occupied West Bank, where on September 22nd, Israeli troops carried out raids in the town of Qabatia, killing 7 Palestinians. A warning: the images from that raid are disturbing to watch. They show Israeli soldiers throwing at least 3 bodies off a rooftop, swinging the bodies back and forth before tossing them over the edge of the building. The United Nations has called the actions seen in this video grotesque and inhumane. Dr. Mustafa, at least 41,000 people killed in Gaza, 96,000 injured. The international community, for example, on the case of Qabatia, is saying that these things have to be investigated. The Israeli army is saying it's investigating the case. But do you genuinely believe that an outcome might come out of this particular story itself? Are we likely to see people prosecuted because of what happened to those people?
Absolutely not. This never happened. When Shireen Abu Aqli was shot to death by an Israeli sniper, nobody was held accountable. When I was shot twice with live ammunition while I was trying to treat an injured person in 1996, in my white coat as a medical doctor, nobody was accused of that crime and nobody was held accountable. And the same applies now to this case. But let me tell you that in the West Bank alone, there are at least 522 bodies that are still held by Israel, and they are not allowing them to be buried in dignity. Some of the prisoners who die in prison, either of torture or because of bad conditions or because of sickness, they are kept in jail. Their bodies are kept in jail to complete their term of sentence. Like if somebody has to be imprisoned for 40 years according to them, and they die when they are 20 years only in jail, they will keep them in jail. They will keep the bodies in jail. And it's absolutely horrible. And the big question here is why Israel is not punished for that. Why so many Western governments and countries who keep teaching us about human rights, about democracy, about the international law, about the international humanitarian law, and who hold Palestinians responsible for any act that they think could violate international law, are doing nothing to Israel. Why Israel is above the law? Because Israel is above the law, and because Israel is impunitive to international law, it is now allowed to commit massacres in Lebanon, not only in Gaza, not only in the West Bank, not only in Palestine, but also in Lebanon, and most probably tomorrow in Syria. This kind of gang behavior that Israel is allowed to conduct will result in a total disaster because of those who are not only complicit with Israel, but actually participating in these genocides with the Israelis.
Mohammed, on the bodies still in that truck parking near a hospital in Gaza, the very few statements that we got, one of them is from the International Committee of the Red Cross saying that while they were not involved in the transfer, but they reiterate the right of all families to obtain information about their loved ones and to bury them with dignity and in accordance with custom and tradition. Do you think that the reason why we're not seeing a reaction because we're in the midst of fast-moving situation in Gaza and in Lebanon, or is it because of impunity in the Israelis have been enjoying a sense of impunity for decades, as Dr. Mustafa al-Barghouti was saying, and therefore they said, we can send whatever number of dead bodies to Gaza as we can, and therefore we don't have to worry about any repercussions.
Yeah, absolutely, as you said, Hashem. It's basically Israel has been doing this kind of stunt repeatedly throughout the war. It's not the first time. And it's not the ugliest there is. There is Israeli soldiers are coming forward and bragging about running over dead Palestinian bodies and living Palestinians with tanks and military vehicles until they turn their bodies literally into mush, indistinguishable from any other meat that you can find on the market, quite literally. They also brag that they collect Palestinian dead bodies and shuffle it with the rubble to hide it whenever an international delegation is coming into Gaza. And as Dr. Mustafa said, they kidnap a huge amount of Palestinian bodies, an unknown amount of bodies that they take back to Israel as a bargaining chip. It's not only people in Gaza, they also take people from the West Bank and Palestinian citizens of Israel, like Walid Daqqa, who Israel is holding his body until today after he died in prison. So this is a systematic policy of deliberately dehumanizing Palestinians in any shape and form and exploiting any opportunity to inflict the maximum amount of pain possible on them.
Ahmed, do people in Gaza that you're in touch with believe that there could be a sense of a deal in the upcoming days that could put an end to this war that has been going on for quite some time?
I believe the people in Gaza, and me personally, we have more optimistic about reaching a deal in November or December last year. But now, no one is even talking about the deal. We, the Palestinians, we understand that Israel and its allies in the West, America and Britain and the European Union, are weaponizing time against the Palestinian people. We keep talking about the deal and a deal and a deal, but in fact, what's happening on the ground is that America and the West is giving Israel more time to commit more massacres, to perpetuate more genocide against the Palestinian people, and not only the Palestinian people in Gaza, but also the Palestinian people in the West Bank and now in Lebanon. We do not know where this will lead us. We don't know when the war will end, because it's clear that the West is not really interested in having a deal. It's not really interested about having a ceasefire. And we don't really believe the talks that come out of the mouths of these European leaders when they call for a ceasefire. In fact, they keep equipping the Israeli army, providing the Israeli army with the weaponry they need so that they continue the massacres, the genocide against the Palestinian and the Lebanese people as well. Unfortunately, we are not optimistic at all in this manner, and we don't know when this will end, if this will end at all.
Dr. Mustafa, if you remember, for months, the Americans, who have huge leverage when it comes to the Middle East, have been saying that they're doing their best to try to prevent the conflicts in Gaza to spill over. Now, not only did it spill over, but it's expanding beyond Gaza. We see now what's happening in Lebanon and the potential for Iran to be dragged into an open confrontation with Israel. Do you believe that the potential for a broader ceasefire that involves Gaza, Lebanon at the same time is feasible, can happen in the upcoming days?
The simple answer is no, and you don't need to dig hard to find the answer, because the Israeli government has just declared that they are rejecting the American proposal to have a ceasefire, even temporary ceasefire in Lebanon. And several fascist ministers in this fascist Israeli government have declared that if Netanyahu accepts even a small temporary ceasefire, they will resign and bring down the government. You are talking about fascism in control in Israel. That is the reality. And these crimes cannot be happening except by a fascist regime. And in reality, Netanyahu is very clear. He made his way to not only prolong the war in Gaza, he also violated Rafah and now erasing it to the ground. And now he started the war with Lebanon. And very soon he will try to push for a war with Iran, hoping and dreaming about attracting the United States to also participate in that war. This is his real goal, a regional war, because he wants to destroy any other power in the region that could not submit to Israel and Israeli plans. And let me say that I do not believe a single word coming from those in charge in the American administration, because we have a record of 1 year about the war in Gaza. Each time they spoke about ceasefire, it turned out they are encouraging Israel to continue. Each time they spoke about mediation, it turned out they are covering up for the Israelis. And now the same behavior is repeating, not only in relationship to Gaza, but also in relationship to Lebanon. It's all about giving Israel the time, giving Israel the conditions, giving Israel the help to continue this terrible genocide. And let me remind you that the United States of America provided Israel with 50,000 tons of explosives since 7th of October. And Israel has thrown on Gaza no less than 83,000 tons of explosives, 32 kilograms of explosives for each man, woman, and child. How could anybody live with that? It's a horrible, horrible genocide, and it is going on. And nobody is trying to stop them, from those who are in alliance with Israel and those who are providing military aid to Israel.
Mohammed, the war now shows no signs of abating. And when you look at all the literature that we had over the last 70 or 80 years, from the Geneva Convention, from the agreement to end the war in Vietnam, from the ICC statute, all talking about the need to show dignity when we are dealing with repatriation of mortal remains. And you see this case, which is baffling everyone now, watching the story now evolving in Gaza about the truck carrying packed with 88 dead bodies, and no one is willing to step in to offer an answer to what happened to those people. And you take this against the backdrop of this widening war in the region. Could it just pave the way to more atrocity, more uncertainty, more violence in the future? Mohammed?
Yeah, absolutely. Israel is here setting an internationally sanctioned and internationally tolerated precedent that is very ugly and dangerous for other regimes around the world involved in human rights violations. Israel is saying to the whole world, here we are, bombing and incinerating children, hacking them into pieces. They have to be collected in plastic bags because there is no identifiable remains. It's okay to leave thousands of bodies on the street to decompose in the open and get eaten by dogs and cats. And it's perfectly okay to collapse the entire medical and health sector, collapse and bomb and invade and raid hospitals. And it's okay to bomb refugee shelters. All of these things are going to be repeated by other regimes around the world who would point a finger and say, look, Israel did it and it was okay. Israel did this and the international community played along with it.
Let me go to Ahmed. Ahmed, the authorities in Gaza are struggling to deal with the magnitude of the destruction and the increasing death toll. Now, they don't have the expertise to deal with the decomposed bodies. They will need forensics to try to help them with the DNA profiling to be able to identify the dead bodies. Are we likely to end up with people buried in more and more unmarked graves in Gaza?
Most likely, yes, because we have seen that happen so many times during the past year, during the genocide. There are so many thousands and thousands of Palestinians who were buried without even being identified by the authorities or their families. If you go to Gaza, we'll find massive graves everywhere in Gaza. On the streets, you will find on the streets so many dead bodies where dead people were buried on the streets because we did not have the authority, we did not have the capacity to identify these martyrs. So many hundreds of people or thousands of people are now still buried under the rubble. Hundreds of people were found on the streets, decomposed, and we could not, their families even could not identify them. So most likely this will happen because there's no other way of identifying these people.
Dr. Mustafa, let's assume that there is a deal tomorrow, both in Gaza and in Lebanon. A temporary ceasefire with the aim to reach a permanent ceasefire, the end of a chapter, the beginning of a new one. Do you genuinely believe that in these circumstances, with a ceasefire, peace will finally prevail in the region?
No, I don't. Not at the moment, and not as long as these fascists are governing in Israel. And not as long as the United States is ready to provide the complete and total support to Israel in every other aspect and in every matter. Peace will prevail only if we are accepted as equal human beings. Peace will prevail only if Israel is forced by sanctions to end its occupation, end its apartheid system, and end this system of oppression and persecution of the Palestinian people. Peace will come one day, but it will not be with these murderers. It will be with those who believe in real peace and believe in justice and believe in the right of the Palestinian people to have the same freedom as they do, to have dignity, and to be treated in a dignified manner. And we will never stop struggling for just peace, but not any peace, a just peace that allows Palestinians to have their rights, have their freedom, allow the refugees to return to their homes they were displaced from, whether in 1948 or in this year. The road to peace is very clear, that Israel has to accept to end its terrible occupation.
A delicate moment in the region indeed. For now, we'll have to leave it there. Dr. Mustafa Al-Barghouti, Ahmed Al-Naouq, Mohammed Shehada, I really appreciate your insight. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.